Today, Doug Wardlow. Good morning.
Wonderful to be here.
How's it going?
It's going very well.
Yeah? Good weekend, I presume?
An excellent weekend. Honored to receive the endorsement of the party and all that. Absolutely.
Trying to keep up with all the news coming out of the weekend conventions. And again, it's fascinating to see that on the GOP side, it was relatively uneventful. Things kind of went the way that it was supposed to, but boy, the dominoes still continue to fall. When you look at that, how much moving forward in your campaign do you have your eye on that? I mean, I know there's some other moves that may take place that may have an effect on your race, but what are you keeping an eye on right now?
Well, it's certainly interesting to watch, isn't it? It's a circus over on the Democrat side, and we've got Keith Ellison rumored to be getting in the race today, and that's very interesting. I mean, but really, all these folks, Keith Ellison, Mike Hatch might be getting in if Keith Ellison gets in. They're all part of the same extreme team. Mm-hmm. It's just that Keith Ellison may be the most extreme.
Lori Swanson has been criticized on many fronts for not necessarily focusing her efforts as Attorney General on issues in Minnesota. Right, focusing on joining lawsuits against Donald Trump and a lot of grandstanding issues. When you think about the Attorney General's office, what describe the role that you believe the Attorney General of Minnesota should play and what your focus and priorities would be in that role.
Right, absolutely. So you're right. Lori Swanson has politicized the office, and Mike Hatch before her really began the process of completely politicizing the office. The Attorney General is the top legal officer and also the top law enforcement official in the state. And so the Attorney General needs to put the rule of law above politics, and that's what I'm going to do. Lori Swanson, like you said, she's been suing the president. She sued the president on the travel ban. She sued the president to prevent him from putting a question on the census about citizenship. She's been doing all of these things and not focusing on what needs to be done. For example, prosecuting welfare fraud. The Attorney General is the only statewide official that actually has the authority to prosecute welfare fraud, including child care fraud. We know there's a huge problem with that in Somali daycare centers and money going to terrorists. And that's Lori Swanson dropping the ball. So I'm going to make sure that we prosecute welfare fraud, prosecute illegal voting, stand up for election integrity. We can change the way elections work and have fair elections in Minnesota, which will change the political complexion of the state if we just enforce the laws that we have. So that's what this is, a law enforcement office.
Right. And, to give you another example, when Rebecca Otto filed her lawsuit trying to prevent counties from being able to hire their own private auditing firms instead of being compelled to go with her office, shouldn't Lori Swanson have defended the state of Minnesota since the legislature legally passed that law? They have the authority to pass that law. Governor Dayton signed that law, signed that bill into law.
Right.
Where was Lori Swanson when the state was being sued by the state auditor?
That's right. Yeah. Where was Lori Swanson? This seems to be a question that keeps coming up. Where was Lori Swanson? She's silent. She's not doing what she's supposed to be doing. She's just following her political agenda.
Yeah. That office and the state auditor's office to an extent, I think the DFL has had such a lock on that office, on those statewide offices, that they don't look at them as the roles they are supposed to play. They look at them as political stepping stones.
That's what's happened. Yeah, 48 years holding one office, that's too long.
That's too long.
651-989-5855 if you want to get in on the conversation. Of course, you can use the hashtag TCNT on Twitter as well. Do want to ask you about a couple of the more recent moves of Lori Swanson. First, though, again, talking with GOP-endorsed Attorney General candidate Doug Wardlow. For those that aren't totally familiar with you, let's do a bit of a refresher on your background and your decision to run for the office.
Well, absolutely. So I'm from Eagan, Minnesota. I served in the state house in 2011 and 12 from Eagan. I live in Prior Lake now. I'm a constitutional lawyer. I work with Alliance Defending Freedom, which is a nonprofit Christian legal organization. You probably saw in the news the Jack Phillips Masterpiece Cake Shop.
Yeah. We were talking about it earlier.
Yep, absolutely. So that's one of our Alliance Defending Freedom cases, working on cases like that, stand up for religious liberty and free speech in cases all across the country, really. So that's my background. I got into practicing law starting with eminent domain litigation, always representing private property owners against the government. So suing the government's kind of fun, actually. It's, set the right tone for my career, and it logically led to where I am now. And I think that we need an attorney general, like I said, and this is what I'm going to do, who prioritizes the rule of law. It's very simple. This is a partisan office, but it's not one that should be political.
We've seen Lori Swanson make a couple of headlining moves over the course of the past few months. There was the the looking at the newer sophisticated scams victimizing Minnesotans. That one was making a few headlines. And then more recently, the Arizona-based pharmaceutical company apparently using brazen and crass marketing tactics in the lawsuit filed along with the Minnesota Board of Pharmacy, alleging that this particular group illegally marketed the painkiller too aggressively by pressuring doctors to prescribe it. Your thoughts on these moves? Because from our perspective, it looked like, without knowing sort of the validity of the lawsuit, it looked like these were things that were being done to sort of raise her profile heading into the race. So your thoughts?
That's right. And there may well be merit to these cases, right? And one function of the Attorney General's office is to enforce our consumer fraud statutes. And so there may be some merit to these things, but you're right. The timing is very suspicious, dropping the fentanyl lawsuit right before her endorsing convention, and that's what Lori Swanson has been doing. She basically sues companies and a lot of times harasses companies to get a headline in the paper. And then she gets the headline in the paper, and then this lawsuit quickly settles. So she just goes for the headline, settles the case, and not much is accomplished. So it seems it's just like a political mill almost to generate headlines, and the Star Tribune seems obliging whenever she wants to do that.
There was a lot of surprise and a lot of a fair amount of shock when Lori Swanson dropped out of the endorsement race and essentially now has dropped out of the race for Attorney General. And then the swarm of names that popped up yesterday, it just felt to me, and I'm curious your take on it. It felt to me like there was this sudden realization on the part of people in the DFL that, holy crap, we might lose this office that we've had a stranglehold on now for decades. We better get some heavy hitters. We better get some big names into this race. Why do you feel like it's so crucial to them to continue to hold this office?
Oh, so the DFL has made the Attorney General's office the heart of the DFL political machine. I mean, they do all sorts of things with the office. They reward their friends, trial lawyers. They, in 2006, there was a settlement with Capital One. So Lori Swanson, then Solicitor General, and Mike Hatch sued Capital One alleging consumer fraud, and they settled the case out. And in the settlement agreement, they gave $250,000 almost of settlement funds to Acorn. So they're doing political things with the office, actually supporting groups that directly support Democrats. And yes, you could call it corrupt, or at least pseudo-corruption, indicia of corruption abound.
Well, and I guess that's the sort of the obvious concern, more in regards to the politicizing of it. If you get a Representative Keith Ellison, entering into this race and heaven forbid end up winning. I mean, that when that immediately popped up yesterday, it was like, oh, that's like the last person that we want to have, running as Attorney General. And it's amazing to me that position that should be very straightforward. You have a job, and you mentioned it earlier. You have a job. It shouldn't be politicized the way that it is, but unfortunately, it is. Speak a little bit to that. I mean, how is that allowed? How is the position of Attorney General allowed to be politicized the way that it is?
It really shouldn't be allowed to be politicized. It's just, when you have one party in control for nearly half a century, things are going to happen, and it's become a little political fiefdom. And Mike Hatch really pushed that forward, and he may be jumping into the race again too. Scandal-ridden career politician Mike Hatch. And then you've got extremist Keith Ellison and his ties to Nation of Islam, which he has disavowed, but he worked for the group for 18 months. So it's really quite something. We do not want extremists and hyper-partisan, far-left socialist political types like that in the top law enforcement office.
It's always odd to me when you have an office that is designed to serve a specific function and you want somebody in that position that has a specific skill set. Like you, for example, you're an attorney. It would make sense to have somebody with a law background be the Attorney General. Yet it is an elected position, so anybody could run for it. Anybody could sort of end up with any skill set. How do you message across the state to get people to show up and circle the ballot next to your name for an office that is should be rather technical in nature?
So it's rather technical in nature, but it does so many very important things, and it's been politicized by the Democrats. And when we take it back, we can use the office just by putting it back on the right track to do a lot of really important things, right? So things that people are very excited about and is generating a lot of enthusiasm for the campaign, standing up for election integrity, like I said, making sure that we have fair elections, prosecuting illegal voting, backing up our county attorneys to make sure they have the resources that they need to prosecute criminals and put them behind bars, so keeping Minnesotans safe. The Attorney General also represents all state agencies, of which we have 102 state agencies and boards and commissions, whenever they're enforcing their rules. So we can pull back on the regulatory state. We can lift the burden of regulations off of job creators. There's just so much that we can do with the office. The list goes on and on. So even though it's a technical kind of office, it's very exciting to think about the possibilities of actually taking this office back from the Democrats and depoliticizing it and getting it on track and doing what it's supposed to do. And all of a sudden, what do you know? You have a tool for limiting government and getting us back on a path towards liberty and prosperity.
How do you capitalize on what is the perceived chaos going on right now? I mean, it appears as if with the moves of Lori Swanson that there is obviously a lot of headline raising and a lot more awareness coming to this to the election in general with all the races. How do you go and capitalize on that moving forward?
Absolutely. So we need to get the message out, right? And with Keith Ellison getting into the race, I mean, this guy, you don't get more left-wing or more extreme than Keith Ellison. And we need to ask the question, and Minnesotans, first of all, Minnesotans deserve to know what are his ties to anti-Semites like Louis Farrakhan, right, and the Nation of Islam, which he has disavowed. But, he worked there. He dined with Louis Farrakhan as recently as 2013 when President Rouhani of Iran was visiting to address the United Nations. So he's had this continuing relationship with a terrible anti-Semite. We need to get that message out so people realize that, hey, we don't want this dangerous far-left extreme politician in the top law enforcement position in Minnesota.
Yeah, this may be me a little tinfoil hattish, so I don't want to pin this on you, so much. But it does feel like the with the chaos, the desperation with which it appears that they want to hang on to this office. I mean, there's the potential to uncover a fair amount of corruption, with this office. If you have the person in this office that is doing their job correctly, we all remember not too long ago the community action scandal where you had government money, tax money in the form of grants going to this nonprofit that was supposed to be providing heating assistance to the poor, yet well-connected leaders of this nonprofit, well-connected to people in the legislature, were taking that money and going on cruises and trips to New York and the Caribbean and things like that. That's the type of corruption that goes on in every state. I mean, this is not like something that's unique to Minnesota. There's corruption all over the place. But you have an attorney general who's focused on their job, not focused on politicizing that office. That's the sort of thing that can be uncovered.
Absolutely.
And when I see a Keith Ellison, jumping into this race seemingly out of nowhere, my first thought is, I put on the tinfoil hat and I said, well, what don't they want Minnesotans to find out about if they lose control of this office?
Well, right. And having an office in one party for nearly half a century, it's only natural to think that way. And actually, you talked about nonprofits and corruption. And while the Attorney General has jurisdiction over nonprofits, so I will be draining the swamp with respect to nonprofits and everything else, and that's why I want to get in there. We have a huge Minnesota swamp to drain, and the Attorney General's office is really the best tool that we have to drain that swamp.
That's the job that is supposed to be done by that position.
Yes.
Well, I guess the fear is that people have gotten so accustomed to, and like as we've been talking about, the way it's been under one party power for so long, people have gotten very accustomed to that particular position being treated a particular way. You mentioned it earlier, really going and articulating. It's like, no, it should not be politicized this way. We know that, but it's getting that message out to the rest of the voters of, this position has not been treated with the respect that it needs to be treated with. And then to me, that's what needs to resonate. What was the biggest takeaway for you coming out of the convention over the weekend?
Well, the biggest takeaway for me was, first of all, we have a lot of support for the campaign, and that's very honored to have all the tremendous support from the party. And it was just fascinating and wonderful to see, people getting excited about the Attorney General's office. So once I got up there on stage and gave the speech and really laid out how important this office is and what we can do with it when we depoliticize it and get it back to focusing on the rule of law and the Constitution, standing up for constitutional rights, the First Amendment, the Second Amendment. When people start to realize, hey, this is a really important office for standing up for the rule of law and the Constitution, they get very excited. So that was the biggest takeaway, that people can get and are getting excited about this race in a way that, in other states, they do get excited about the Attorney General race, but Minnesota just hasn't been the case.
talking with Doug Wardlow, again GOP endorsed Attorney General candidate. Real quick, while we have you in studio, and you mentioned it in a bit of your background, your thoughts on the Supreme Court ruling when it comes to the to the cake baker. I mean, we discussed it earlier. It was a decision, but kind of not a decision, and kind of curious to get your quick take on what they ruled yesterday.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's kind of a mixed decision. So first of all, it's a fantastic victory for Jack Phillips, the cake artist in Colorado. It's a fantastic win for religious liberty, and it has some very broad implications insofar as the court said, hey, the government may not be hostile towards religion, and when the government is hostile to religion, so in that case, the Colorado Civil Rights Commission was treating Jack Phillips, when the case was being reviewed, in a way and making remarks that were very hostile towards his Christian faith. And they also treated differently a set of 3 different cases that were very similar to Jack Phillips, but where cake bakers had declined to bake cakes that supported traditional marriage. The Civil Rights Commission said, well, that's fine. That doesn't violate the Civil Rights Act in Colorado. But when you refuse to bake the same-sex wedding cake and go celebrate the same-sex ceremony through the cake, that's not okay. Right, so the double standard. The court said that's not okay. That's basically viewpoint discrimination, and so that's going to be a useful precedent going forward in other First Amendment cases. At the same time, the holding was limited to the facts of the case, so it wasn't the huge free speech win that we were all hoping for, but still a significant victory.
Was it because of a lack of having the facts be able to bear out for the Supreme Court to make a final decision on it? Or was it just, in your opinion, they just decided to not make a final decision when it comes to this particular issue?
I think they decided not to make a final decision on the free speech side of it. And I think that they just, they wanted to assemble the largest majority that they could. And the way to get the 7-2 vote that they got was to do it this way. And then there are other cases coming up through the pipeline, like the Barronell Stutzman case involving a florist in Washington State, that are teeing up the free speech issue as well, and so that those cases will come up through the pipeline and then be decided.
Do you think this, Drew? Do you think the Supreme Court was just like, we don't have enough stuff to rule on, so we can't make all our decisions based on one? So let's spread it out a bit. We'll wait for the next one, and then we'll decide on that one. Let's not just throw it all into this one.
You say that in a bit of a joking manner, but there might be some actual truth to that, because there are other cases pending. And
yes, there are.
There's other cases sort of coming down the docket.
And and as a rule of sort of good jurisprudence, you're supposed to make the most limited decision that you can.
Right.
The courts aren't there to make policy. You try to make the most limited as you can.
It's like us punting prep to we can save that for tomorrow. We can say that's a good Friday. That's a good Friday decision. That's a good Friday decision. It's not rule on it.
But it is a little bit frustrating, because they could have done, they could have just stood up for the First Amendment and done the right thing in this case. It would have been fantastic. But still, we'll take what we can get.
Eventually, this issue will get decided the right way.
It will.
Nobody should be compelled.
That's right.
Or forced to do anything that they don't want to do.
That's right. That's ridiculous.
The bottom line.
Yep,
right?
it is. It is.
Doug Wardlow, where can people find out more about you? You got a website, you got a social media presence you want to plug?
Absolutely. So the website is DougWardlowAG.com, and then we're on Facebook as well, Doug Wardlow 4AG, and Twitter.
All right. Congratulations on the endorsement.
Yeah,
Good luck in the campaign.
Thank
Stay
you.
in touch. We will certainly be talking to you several more times over the course of this campaign.
Sounds great. Very good. Thanks so much.
Coming up, we will dive in.